Good morning. We're going to get started here. Welcome, everyone. This is the Water Quality Fee Stakeholder Meeting. Today is Monday, March 2nd. My name is David Ceccarelli. I'm the Fee Branch Chief here at the Water Board. Today, giving the presentation, to my right is Glenn Osterhage, one of the fee managers, and also to the left of me is John Russell, the Deputy Director of the Division of Administrative Services. Before we get started, just like a few housekeeping rules for those that are in the room. In case an alarm or emergency does go off, we're asked to go down to the first floor, so take the stairs down and then go across the street to the park across the street. If anyone needs assistance, please come and see us and we'll help with that. Restrooms are out the door to the left. For those that may be staying for the next meeting, there is a cafeteria downstairs on the first floor. This meeting is being webcast, so those that are in the room, when it's time to ask questions, if you have a question, please wait until a mic is passed around. We'll have staff with mics that are being passed around. Again, the meeting is webcast, and if you'd like to ask questions through the email, please do. We have a staff here that is taking the emails and the questions, and we'll do our best of our ability to help answer those. Again, throughout the meeting, if you have questions, please ask us. And if there's something that we're not able to answer, we'll definitely help get you an answer after this meeting. And we're, again, more than happy to meet with you after the meeting. So this is the first of 3 scheduled meetings. As most of you guys are aware, these meetings are kind of set up with the schedules of the release of the budgets. When the Jan 10th budget was released, this is kind of our first meeting to kind of look at what's in that budget, kind of go over the numbers, kind of to go over the cost drivers, and talk about what we refer to as our budget change proposals that are within that budget schedule. Please keep in mind, though, we're still kind of in the budget hearing process. A lot of that's going to be coming up in the next few weeks. There's again potential for changes to take place. So we always say this is kind of early in the process, but again, we just want to get out. We want to start having these conversations, make you aware of kind of what's going on, and kind of talk about the steps and the different processes that will take place. As most of you are aware, usually when the May revise comes out and our next meeting that'll be in June, we'll have, again, a little more concrete data and know a little bit more about like the proposals and be able to talk a little bit more about kind of what the adjustments may look like for next fiscal year. So kind of just looking at the agendas, again, we'll kind of go over some of the budget cost drivers. And then we also have staff from Office of Information Management Analysis, which is going to do a presentation on the 2018-19 performance report presentation. I know that we've done this a couple of times in our stakeholder meetings, but the presentation has changed, and there's, again, ways of navigating through this that we'd like to present. And then finally, we'll have an open discussion and then discuss next steps. So before we get started, I'll move this to John Russell, and if he has some comments he'd like to make.
Just a couple comments. First, thank you all for those of you that showed up in person today. I wouldn't blame any of you if you decided to stay home and do this via webcast. But thank you for those of you in the room and those of you on the webcast as well for participating in this. I just wanted to emphasize quickly what David said, the cost drivers. These are all our very early numbers. So, and we say this every year in January or February or March, whatever it is now. For our first meeting. This is, they're very early in the year. We have our revenue and expenditure numbers are firming up, and as we go through the series of stakeholder meetings here, those will be a lot more firm as we get into June and July or so. The other thing I wanted to mention is one of the reasons that the numbers are particularly squishy this year is we're still having trouble with Fiscal, which is our new statewide accounting system. We've been able to back into a lot of our numbers via timesheet data and other things that we internally have, which gets us 80 to 90% of the way there, but it's not the usual detailed accounting report level that we are accustomed to in years past. So we are in the process of, and this is no state secret that we're behind on that. You can look on the SCO website and see that we're one of about 20 departments that haven't closed out last year yet. And a lot of the departments that are still struggling are the larger complex departments like ours. So we're working through it with finance. Hopefully by March or so, we'll get firm expenditure and revenue data for last year, and that'll help us out as we move forward in these discussions. And then the other thing, while I'm thinking of it, and I say this again every meeting we have, and just so I don't forget it, if during this presentation or afterwards, if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to either myself or David or Glenn, either via email or telephone call, whatever, or in person, whatever you want to do. We'd be happy to talk through any of this with you if you think of something after this meeting. With that, I think we'll turn it over to Glenn.
Good morning, Glenn Osterhage. So jumping into our presentation, not a lot on our agenda. The attachment one, let's see if it's, we'll get up here, so we'll scroll up there. It's the same attachment we've had in the past. We will talk about 3 BCPs that were in the January proposed budget, how it affects certain programs. 2 of them are specific to within a single program, one for stormwater and cannabis, which most of you know is kind of its own unique entity, and then 1 BCP that impacts all programs in there. So again, this is very complicated, a lot of columns of information. The biggest ones to look at is column E, which is our allocation when we do all of our roll-ups, so all of our costing. Every year we have additional costs for staffing, retirement, pro rata. We kind of spread those across all the fee-paying programs. So that's really the target that's in the budget. As John said, we're still struggling with the fiscal. So this data here looks at just within a small little window of what's our allocated expenditure from the budget and what's our forecasted revenue. When we get to June, hopefully we'll have year-end reports from last year. We can kind of look at what our reserve is and see if we have any flexibility as we look to what our fee proposals are going to be for next year. So most programs are going to need roughly about a 10% fee increase. We do realize that we had increases last year. We generally say we're in the 4 to 5%. Our normal fees would go up. The main driver for the programs that are around 10%, it's not listed in here, but it has to do with pro rata. The amounts for this year were larger than we had thought they were going to be. And we also had a situation, I'm not trying to figure out the right term for it, was a miscommunication or misinterpretation of how we handled pro rata last year. We thought we had a 1 year, I'm going to use a term reprieve, it might be the wrong word, that we thought we'd had other funding sources to cover pro rata for last year. We didn't realize that it was basically, in a way, a loan. We had to repay that. So in essence, pro rata from last year is being added to this year, plus the increase for this year that was higher than we had projected. So that's the primary driver for why it's higher than the 4 or 5%, other than we have different revenue levels. Sometimes we don't hit our revenue targets from year to year. Some programs, the 2 that year over year have been kind of paying for themselves, land disposal and stormwater, are in fairly good condition, may not need fee increases. But the other ones being WDR, Water Quality Cert, NPDS, Confined Animals, and Ag Lands. Based off this information, not knowing what our reserve is going to be, we'll need fee increases. With that, I'm going to see if David wants to have a few words on the different BCPs that are in play. Again, there are 3 of them. The first one, which is about $1.5 million. This is kind of in the middle of the page. I didn't realize it's really small print down at the bottom. But it's for the harmful algal bloom program. That's the one we're going to spread the cost across all fee-paying programs to pay for that. The second one listed is for the stormwater program specifically for $175,000. That's business licenses for the stormwater discharge compliance. And then the final one, which is really where I'm going to hand it over here, is for the cannabis program. It's $10.5 million here. This is actually a replacement funding. The funding that we had prior years actually expired. It was roughly about a $12 million program, but different mechanisms between water quality, water rights, and general funding. The ask right now is for $10.5 million, so it's kind of a replacement, although on here it shows that it's brand new. So with that, David, go ahead and.
Well, yes, and so like Glenn said, there's 3 BCPs that are currently right now in the budget. One that B right there, the continuation of the cannabis program. That goes back to replace our ask in our BCP for 16-17, and that ask originally was 120 positions, and basically kind of what took place, and we've been having. What's interesting is we had some negotiations and some conversations with the Department of Finance prior to putting this BCP in place. So they came back to us and basically advised us on like the number of staffing and the funding sources. And so for the total BCP, it's $22.5 million, and it's actually a reduction of 120 down to 116. Now, that is split up between water quality and water rights. And the funding for the water quality side, which is the WDPF, would be $10.5 million. And so that's the portion that we would be collecting fees on. And then we're still in that process of analyzing and having discussions about what that fee would look like. And so I know on the fund conditions statement or the cost driver statement that Glenn is showing you, it's kind of broken down there on the bottom. So we're definitely kind of still in the negotiation process of looking at, what that BCP and what those impacts to the WPF are going to look like. The B, the business license stormwater discharge compliance. And we do have program staff here to talk a little bit about this, but it's $175,000. It's could be a small impact, if any. We might be able to absorb it since it's with the stormwater program. Again, looking at our revenue, there's a good potential that we'll be able to absorb that one. And then the final one, as Glenn mentioned, is that we're looking at spreading that out to all fee payers. And again, if we have questions related to the BCP itself, Karen Mogus from our Deputy Director from the Division of Water Quality is here to help answer those questions.
So with that, do we have any questions? Okay, just checking with Sarah if we got any emails.
I think we have one.
We got a couple.
Just wondering if you could explain the algae being spread over all programs. How is that justified? I don't mean that to be confrontational. It's a legitimate question.
Yeah, we'll punt this one over to Karen.
Well, I'm just going to, off the top of my head, make a justification. But so one could argue that algae is a result of a number of factors, including temperature, so flow, as well as nutrients. And I would argue that most of our program dischargers have sources of nutrients in them. And so, that would be the rationale for spreading it across. It's a pervasive issue across the entire state and is a growing problem. So.
As we're waiting for the next question to come up, we'll still take input if there's justification as to selected programs that it should be directed towards. We'll take the input. We're not set on this. It's just our initial thought process. That one will spread across. Oh, Annie.
Bob Gore from the Gualco Group. I have first of all, a comment. Thank you for Deputy Director Mogus being here. It's good to have the program people attend. On Agland's Tier B, or ILRP, whichever you want to call it, as long as we're Tier Aing and Tier Bing, CV salts has been approved by the board, as you know. The fees kick in. I'm on the executive committee. We're working on them now. At some point, we need to see a reconciliation between this per acre charge and the CV salts program fees, which the stakeholders bear directly. So it might be good to start that structure this year since the fees are kicking in. The work plans are being approved. We're revising the BPA as the state board directed. So maybe we can do that, eh?
So without knowing the details of what you're working on with CV salts, how did that change as far as how the staff works on that program?
The funding is based upon irrigated pastures with no external nitrogen input or other discharges. So the fact that the Aggies are going to be paying essentially a nitrate discharge fee to CV salts to manage it, it may mitigate the problem. I don't want to go on and on, just we need to reconcile them.
Okay, yeah, we can take that offline with that program and start those conversations.
Ann Walters is the program manager at the Central Valley Water Board, and the inimitable Clay Rogers lends a hand once in a while. Next question. On pro rata, I get overhead and chargebacks, but it would be good to see on a spreadsheet the error that was made, the impact that was made, how much pro rata is the current FY, how much was missed, how much the pro rata is going to be next year, and why it's going up. Yes, I know you're going to say salaries, but it would be good to see some sort of specifics. That is, we had to hire 20 new PGs, 13 new PEs, and here's the average salary. We need some detail on pro rata.
Yeah, so as far as the pro rata, I'll say that was an oversight on my part. So the next meeting we have, we'll have more detail. I missed the boat on that one. It should have been in this data, but it wasn't.
Yeah, we can provide that. And then pro rata isn't directly things that we charge for. It's what other departments charge. I know what it is, but
yeah.
So we pretty much are reactive in that sense that, whatever finance tells us our pro rata is going to be for the year, that's what we tie into it. And we unfortunately don't know exactly why it's going up, nor do we know what it'll be next year, but we can ask finance and get as much information as we can.
There you go. And I'm not bashful. I'll be glad to ask, but it'd be good to know what we're asking about. On desal, you have essentially a two-tiered annual fee. Is that pretty much staying the same? Does anybody have any knowledge of desal?
Yeah, as far as I know, that structure we put in place for the first time last year. There's been no request to change that structure. We're evaluating certain facilities that are going through that process, but right now I have not heard any request to change that structure.
Okay, last comment, thank you. WDR 401, NPDES, and ag lands are all going up significantly. Overall, the cost of compliance are continuing to skyrocket. The fee payers are going to be restive, just FYI. It'd be good to see some more information. Some of our clients don't understand why the fees are essentially going up in double digits year after year. Anyway, just so you're aware. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, so we can provide a little more information on that as well as we get, like we do every year when we get into May or so. So the other thing I wanted to point out is it's related to one of the questions Bob brought up was fee structures. So we aren't looking at revising any fee structures themselves right now. We're not working with any outside groups other than the Russian River group, and that's related to a stormwater, regionalization of stormwater permits. So we are working both internally and externally with that. But having said that, we're totally open that if any of you want to open up a change in the fee structures, we can start looking at that. It typically takes us about a year of discussions to get to the point where we're ready to say yes or no to a fee structure change.
And before we go to the next question, I just want to tie into that. So as of right now, we don't have any major changes that we're looking at. As John said, there might be a targeted one here or there. The water quality cert, there's been some discussions with flood control districts, beach nourishment, but those are very isolated and target ones. As far as the global fee structures, right now we're not working on anything significantly like we did in prior years with ag lands, confined animals, or a couple of the big ones over the last couple of years.
So good segue into the CAF program. Two questions. In column D, you're showing a $251,000 staffing increase. Can you shed some light on what's driving that, which part of the CAF program? And then secondly, in column F, you're showing what appears to be a revenue forecast decrease, which is adding. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, first of all, for column D, that staff costs is also program adjustments. So most of that is going to be for the pro rata discrepancy we had from last year. And like I said, at our next meeting in June, we'll have some more information. Staffing-wise, there is no increase in staffing for any of the programs that I'm aware of, with the exception of the BCPs, which is actually column C. So again, most of that is just adjustments for existing salary, retirement, the benefits, pro rata, kind of get all rolled into that one category. F, as far as revenue, we do have adjustments. These are just forecasted. We kind of look at our universe of current fee payers. On this particular one, we haven't added in any new application revenue. I know at least in Central Valley, they had a lot of the poultry and their bovine orders, so we had a lot of enrollments last year that were new. It takes a couple of years for that to settle down, so I try to be a little more conservative on my revenue estimates, just so if we get to June and July, also I'm not dropping it down because we had an adjustment. I'd rather be a little low here and then hopefully add in more as we start fine-tuning our estimates a little bit. Did that answer your questions? Sort of?
Sort of. Yeah, it doesn't explain the decrease in revenue. There appears to be a couple hundred. If you're looking at the difference between 459 in the forecasted revenue and the 251 staff program costs, it would suggest to me that there's actually a projected decrease in revenue in the CAF program.
And some of that is our revenue from last year may have come under our forecast. So we have to project what we think our fees are going to be when we do fee changes.
And in which section of the CAF program was there
The biggest one would be the poultry, because they had a lot of enrollments. So we had to kind of project where we thought the poultry was going to come in. And then the bovine order, again, this is all Central Valley related.
So I'm sorry to keep drilling down.
Yeah, that's fine. So you're talking about the dairies. Dairies are, I haven't looked at it specifically. I'd imagine it's pretty consistent. Obviously, there's probably been a few facilities that have closed or merged, so there might be a little lower revenue, but that program probably isn't changing as much as we're trying to tie in the bovine and the poultry.
Okay, and so it sounds like poultry enrollment increased last year, is that correct?
Yeah, they had a new order that came in play.
Yeah, I work with the industry. I'm very familiar with the new order. So
yeah, so a lot of them are paying for the first time. Their applications, I think, were last year. This is the first year they got invoices. It takes a year or two for that to settle down, but yeah, it's new enrollments for poultry.
So that would lead to an increase in revenue, though, is that correct?
Yes.
Expectations.
Okay.
So yes, I mean, you're correct there. We anticipate this is going to play out for the next couple of years, but we expect with these new orders in place that we are going to drive more revenue in those orders, which then helps basically the dairies within the confined animal feeding program.
Okay, but that would seem to suggest in the meantime then that dairy's paying more than its fair share. Is that an accurate assessment?
At this time, we haven't looked at, I'll call it the sub-programs within confined animals, because poultry and the bovine are so new. Dairies, obviously, at one point, there were 90% of the revenue came from the dairies for that program. We haven't specifically dived down to individual ones. The corollary would be like the stormwater program. We have construction, industrial, and municipal. Every few years, we kind of do an analysis of those three segments of stormwater. We haven't done that for the last couple of years because the poultry is so new.
Glenn. Oh. Stormwater question? Oh, go ahead.
Okay.
Good morning. It seems to me that you would certainly, looking at doing your forecast, you'd want to drill down a little bit deeper. That, I mean, it's on the verge of ludicrous to keep asking ag to pay increasing fees every year when we have zero ability to pass on any of those costs. And when you're looking at the bovine order that's coming online or has came online, my goodness, I mean, you're doing us a complete injustice by not forecasting that potential increase in revenue into your overall budget, number one. I'd say number two, there are still, because of the inability for RB5 to get permits out the door, there's still dollars that are being left on the table because permits have never been issued. So why, again, are we bearing the brunt of the burden when the current staff doesn't even seem to be able to get their damn job done?
I mean, I would say, we are, the dairy program has been carrying the revenue for the program. And this bovine order and the poultry order, these are new. And we've had these discussions for the last couple of years, and we've been working with the regional boards that, you're right, there is a process. It takes time for these permits to get out. And, we anticipated that we wouldn't, as soon as the order was written, we'd anticipate that we'd have, all of these permittees all in place within the first couple of years. It is going to take a couple of years. And, we are projecting, and I think last year maybe we projected a little high and they didn't all come in right away. We do think, though, in the next year or two, it'll start to play itself out and that we will start generating more revenue. We'll be able to track like the number of staff and the number of kind of expenditures that are associated directly towards, poultry work and bovine work. And we do think that there was a lot of staff put on that just to get those orders written and, again, to get those permits put in place. And at the same time, having the dairies and pay their share and basically kind of help support the program. It is a confined animal feeding program, but as time goes on, and then there's other animal types that we're able to get into the program. We'll also help kind of cover the revenue in that side of things. It's just we're in a point where it's going to take a few years for us to get those permits written out the door and that revenue in house.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, it's the same staff. I mean, the dairy staff, whether it's Doug and the guys in Fresno or the folks out of Rancho, they're writing the bovine order. I mean, you're not talking about hiring a whole new staff here to write another order. It's the same damn staff. And dairy's paying for that staff to write another segment of the livestock industry's permit. I mean, I got a problem with that.
And I totally agree with that. But again, keep in mind that it's not a dairy program. It's a confined animal feeding program. So the staff that is involved, true, they've normally always worked on dairies, but the definition, and I mean, I know Karen can go into this more, but it's globally, statewide, it's a confined animal feeding program. So those staff, work on, again, not just dairy sites. And then it just happens that this is a new program, a new order that was put in place, and those staff are taking time and writing those orders.
Again, I appreciate that, and the good part about that is the fact that the staff that's writing the bovine order or the poultry order have experience in writing orders. So it's not like you're hiring new personnel and you've got to train them from the ground up to have the same level of knowledge that Charlene and others currently have at RB5. So, I mean, that should be a cost savings.
Yeah, so with any, I call it ramping up of a new program, we're kind of caught in this catch-22 is we have to have the enrollments before we can add them in. Until you have the enrollments or the revenue, there are costs associated with that. So it's trying to get those two balance and alignment, and it takes a while to get to that state. Go ahead. Oh. Oops. Oh. Let's change mics.
All right. Chuck White with representing Imperial Irrigation District. I just wanted to get a little more correct sense of the staff cost adjustments, the pro rata. If I see column D, it's about 7 million, which is about approximately 5% of the 151 million of the last year's budget. But you said that that would be about the normal adjustment you'd expect to see, but it's going to be about twice that at around 10%. So does that mean that the missing from last year is not in this chart at all, or is it someplace else?
So it gets a little hard to kind of go through all these because we're talking about, will be 7 programs now. So we have a lot of moving parts. One obviously is the salary and retirement that we always say is the 4 to 5%. I think people understand that, although they don't want it. Part of the issue was the pro rata, which I admitted it was an oversight that it wasn't presented here. We'll get it out for the next meeting. The other driving factor, and I'm probably going to hopefully run away from you guys as fast as possible here, is with cannabis actually getting a funding of 10.5, there's actually a reduction of what we had for cannabis before. So cannabis was paying towards what we call the foundational program costs. So cannabis goes down globally about $1.5 million. So those foundational costs kind of get put back into the pool for all the other fee payers to pay towards. So it's not that you're paying for cannabis, it's just that with less cannabis funding in the WDPF, the foundational costs get spread out to the other facilities. So there is that cost in there as well. So you got pro rata, foundational costs, regular salary, retirement benefits. So there's a lot of different pieces. Revenue is the other one. If we're forecasting lower revenue than we did, not necessarily from last year, but maybe we're not as optimistic in some of our revenue forecasts. We just don't have that revenue as well.
So cannabis covered the pro rata costs last year for most of the programs and is considered now to be a loan, which has to, in a sense, to be paid back by adjusted fees. And I still don't understand whether that 7.1 includes the pro rata for both this year and last year, or only this year.
It's both. So
So it's only about 5% then total.
We say 5% of.
Well, the 151 in the first column.
Yes, so 5% is in that. If you're going to math, you say half of your increase is going to be because of normal costs. The other half is for other factors that have changed. Pro rata is one, the cannabis funding and foundational costs. So cannabis did have their portion of pro rata. They did have their portion of foundational costs. Because their funding is actually going down based off the current budget a little bit, those costs get spread out to everyone else as well. So it's not going to be significant, but it might be an extra percent to go up because of that issue. A couple of percentage points for pro rata, maybe a percentage point or two because of revenue, and then the other 5% for normal costs.
So by June, will you be able to break column D out into 2 columns, or maybe 3 columns, one showing the total as you do here, and then 2 other columns showing what is the adjustment from the previous year where with the cannabis borrowed funds, plus the second column being the adjustment for this fiscal year?
So cannabis never really borrowed funds. What happened is when the cannabis program came online, they took over a portion of the redirected fees from the other programs. So the other programs actually got a relief when the
but
cannabis
now we're paying it back, right?
No, there's no payback. They took over a portion of it, but now the governor's office has given us more cannabis tax fund, which has caused the actual cannabis fee portion to be reduced. So because of that fee portion reduction, part of the foundational costs are going to go back to the other programs, if that makes sense. So it really, you for a couple of years, the other programs got a break by having the cannabis program. Now those fees are going down a little bit, or the fee proportion. So a proportion of that's going back to the other programs.
Suffice it to say, hopefully in June, we can break out those numbers a little bit better.
We
So
will,
we'll understand what the pro rata adjustment is this year, and then what the correction is being added in for last year, and have them then add together presumably for what this column.
I only joke because John said we means me. So I will make the commitment to try and break this out in better detail with more, I guess, instead of a one big D column, it might be 3 columns that make up D.
Well, the reason I asked this, I choked when you said it's normally a 4 to 5% adjustment, but it looks like it's going to be a 10% adjustment this year, but it doesn't look like it's 10%. So I was just wondering if there was missing, what I was missing.
Yeah, there's just a lot of different pieces. So we'll check it off a pro rata, slightly less cannabis for WDPF, revenue may be going down for some programs, and then the pro rata, and then hopefully all those kind of merge in together.
Do you basically understand my confusion?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. All right, that's all I ask.
So I think we'll go ahead and take the email question.
You.
Oh, 2 of them? Okay.
Okay. From Jeff Brousseau from the California Stormwater Quality Association. The legislature's final analysis of the fiscal effects of SB 205 noted that all costs would be offset by new fee revenues paid by businesses enrolling in the industrial general permit. Accordingly, if there is an increase, would it be only on industrial general permit permittees?
Yes, I'm looking at Karen here. Yes. So then this, again, is just a roll-up as a global. We had, 1.8% for stormwater. It doesn't break out, like I mentioned before. There is the industrial side, there is the construction side, and there's the municipal side. So in June, as we start looking at fee proposals or fee options that we may take to our board, we'll have more detail then as to say, it sounds like this one is going to be specific to the industrial program versus all stormwater fee payers.
Next question. From Bruce Howdeschelt from the Northern California Water Association. If all irrigated land statewide, there's approximately 135,000 irrigated acres in Siskiyou County, were enrolled, would a fee increase be necessary this year?
Without doing the math, so let's say, what, $1 per acre? We're probably a little higher than that now. So $135,000, $150,000 with additional revenue. Ag lands needs 600,000, 700,000. So at a high level, there would still need to be a fee increase. The amount, I'm not sure at that moment.
Hi, Debbie Webster with the Central Valley Clean Water Association. One issue that seems to keep on coming up year after year is the cost of bringing in new programs and how they should be funded, and usually you fund them through a group. And one thing that was suggested, or at least I suggested a couple of years ago, which we might still want to think about, is that once that program is established, is basically they pay the rest of that group for their startup cost. So instead of them, the whole group maybe having to build up, whether it's a reserve fund or other areas, is that program that's in development cover those costs until the development cost is paid out.
Thank you, Dawn Kapke, McHugh Kapke & Associates. Just a follow-up question to Jeff Brosseau's on the SB 205 BCP. I attempted to try and find that on Finance's website, and I wasn't able to, which may answer the question I have. But just with regard to that and looking at the legislation, it only required specifically for the State Water Board to post the SIC codes on the website, which is already on the State Water Board's website. So I'm just wondering what the costs are attributed to in terms of implementation of that.
So new enrollees, increased numbers of inspections needed, and getting non-filers. We're already doing work that we're not getting compensated for to answer questions about how to get enrolled in the program from people who are now being told that they can't get a business license until they enroll. So it's all program costs once they're enrolled that we're anticipating increasing.
And so their actual permit fees don't, with the increased number of permittees associated with that new enrollment kind of pressure, that's not covering that actual increased cost in terms of the outreach and such, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that's the idea, that it will cover the costs of the increased number of enrollees will cover the cost of the increased workload.
Got it. And so that's back to the comment at the outset that it's likely that will just be rolled into as you're seeing those increased enrollees and cover.
Yeah, long term, yes, we would hope that. I think David mentioned earlier, we kind of say we might absorb this one within our fee increases or non-increases for the program, but ultimately you would expect to have more enrollees. So you may see the benefit year 2 or year 3 when they actually get enrolled. So we have higher enrollments, so we can reduce fees down the road once we have the enrollments.
I'd like to ask the question, in looking at your forecast and so forth, have you guys taken into consideration what's going to happen with the impact of SGMA and GSAs as we're looking at fallowing over 1 million acres in the Central Valley? What's that going to do to the fee structure?
But within this forecast, it doesn't take into consideration any of that. So obviously, if acres get fallowed. I think the regulation is that it stays in the program for up to 5 years as far as programs for can roll out. But ultimately, if we have reduced acres, the impact means that all the other enrolled acres have to pay a little more to compensate.
Yeah, we'll definitely be looking at the impacts of Sigma. Those are a little bit unknown to us right now, even to the Sigma program staff themselves. I mean, January was really one of the key dates that we knew if basins were going to fail or not in their management structures. So as we go through, yeah, there probably will be some impacts from Sigma, but it's a little bit too early for us to tell right now what those will be.
I think I mean, there's an economic study coming out as part of the blueprint, but you're also looking at literally hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue that will not be coming into the state due to that land value being, going from 30 to 40,000 an acre down to could be zero. I mean, that's an overstatement. I mean, nothing will be worth zero, I would anticipate, but if you can't get water, you certainly can't generate revenue.
Any other questions? All right, so I think we'll go on to the next agenda topic.
Well, let's talk about a couple of things while we're still in the fee portion. The salaries increases are typically for our scientists and engineers and geologists are typically 3 to 4 or 5%. Those are built into these. This is one of the bargaining years, though, that the administration and the unions are negotiating again right now. Typically, they come to some resolution before the start of the new year. So we've built in the 3 to 4 or 5% already based on what unions charge for those programs. But there is a possibility, and I'm not saying will happen, but if there is any increases above 5%, we'll have to tack those on. Typically, like I said, we've never seen that. I don't have any reason to believe that those will happen, but we are in a negotiating period right now with the bargaining units. The other thing I wanted to talk about really quickly, I'll get to you in just a minute, Chuck. I guess let's talk really quickly about the elephant in the room on that chart, which is the 261% increase for cannabis fees. We've had a lot of uncertainty in the number of enrollments that are coming in. We had forecasted originally, like every other department in the state that deals with cannabis, on having about 15,000 enrollees into the program. We're ending up with somewhere less than 5,000. So, just doing the quick math, that's only about a third of the income coming in. Right now, and we set our fees on that forecast of 15,000. We didn't really have any idea that those weren't going to materialize. So this year going into the fee setting, we're going to have to look at that pretty heavily. Right now we have a little bit of a revenue shortage in that program. We're dealing with that by not filling vacant positions. I think we have somewhere between 10 and 15 vacancies in that program we're leaving open right now. So I know that's been an issue in the past, is people have said, I don't want my program to have to pay for the cannabis program. So we're still administratively segregating those programs so that there won't be any impacts or as little impacts as we can. But there's a lot of uncertainty in that program right now as to how much the fees our typical fee model, and you're all aware of this, is to increase fees to deal with the cost increases. But a 261% increase is raising a lot of eyebrows, or what it would take. So we're still sort of angling around in the pond to see what other kind of funding we can get to support that program while it gets up as a fledgling industry up and on its feet and can pay for itself. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to say is the one good thing about having this meeting now is this was by design. We give you this information prior to all the legislative budget hearings, and I'm not advocating one way or the other, but you certainly have the opportunity that if you don't like some of the identified funding for any of these, to go to your representatives and say, hey, I want this doesn't make sense. Why are we supporting this? Can't we get some other type of funding for this? And then the legislative hearings themselves, you can go and make your opinions known.
I don't recall if you covered N and O columns, and if you could just briefly explain what those are, I'd appreciate it.
So I was asked a couple of years ago to add in budget year, so future year projections. N and O right now just default to 4%, because I always say that 4 to 5% range. Right now, since we're not looking at our fund reserve, we can't make any decisions as to deferring fee increases. But theoretically, let's just say we had a 20% fund reserve. We could go to our board and say, let's have our fee increases for this year and push it into the future years. So in that case, column N could say 10% if we're going to defer. Column O could be 8 or whatever. So it's just a way of a tool when we have a fund reserve number, which we haven't had now for a year and a half, to kind of say, if we defer costs, what's it going to look like in future years? So right now, it's just defaulting for 4%. Our assumption is we're going to raise fees the full amount, but then we'll go to our board and make some recommendations as to whether or not we have to do the full amount or can we defer it to future years.
Well, for example, in column M, ag lands is 8.6%, and that I'm taking that to be your projection right now is what the overall fee increase is likely to be for ag lands in some way, shape, or form. And so I didn't quite understand what the 4% is, but it's basically looking the way you've done it in the past, not the way we may have to do it this year.
Correct. So on this one, since you're looking at ag lands, let's just say we're in August and we have a reserve. We could go to our board and say, you know what, we're going to recommend we only raise fees 4% this year. The other 4 we'd carry over and say next year we're going to recommend a 9% increase if things hold true for next year, or we could do a 4%, 8%, or whatever. So it's a way of kind of playing around. If
Right
you
now,
have,
N and O are really kind of meaningless.
Yeah,
yes.
they're meaningless. They're placeholders. So, and it'll largely depend on what our board does. If they choose to defer any fees to next year, it's just a visual way for us to keep track of
Thanks.
things.
On the cannabis elephant, as you know, BCC, DPH, and CDFA are being consolidated, and the administration hasn't got their final plan out, which I'm sure you're privy to. If you engage in that negotiations actively, since no one can proceed with cannabis without a water permit, you might get a better idea of whether or not the 261% increase. So I would urge you to get involved in that. The first legislative hearing was last week. Clint Kellum from Finance was pressed hard and danced very well, but he did say there's a working group, so I'm assuming you're on it and you're getting input about what's going on.
Yeah, I'm not sure at the program level if we're on that or not. That is a separate kind of reorganization that's separate from us and Fish and Wildlife. But we are tapped into, we talk to their staff quite a bit in terms of the enrollments that they expect, the financial impacts, the things like that.
Okay.
Hi, Debbie Webster again. Just I guess it's maybe a quick question, or maybe you went over a little bit, but on the different programs, when you were talking about a decrease in revenue, probably because some comes off, are we seeing that reflected in in column D in this program cost? I mean, is it less, if you're going to have less income because people are dropping out, it seems like we would have less staff for that, but I just want to know how you're handling that.
So globally, and I can pass it off to John if he wants to handle that. If it's a short-term issue, we could, like we're doing with cannabis program, hold vacancies, redirect staff to other work activity. On the fee side, administrative side, I'm going to generically say there's more than enough work for the staff to work on. So 4 or 5 years ago, when the steam electric power plants were being looked at, and some of them were either going offline or reducing their flow values, that was a huge impact to the NPDES program. One facility that pays $500,000 going down to $100,000, that's a $400,000 delta that has to be made up by all the other fee payers. So on that one, the NPDS program was not going to reduce staff because the staff was working on all that type of activities. So occasionally you're going to see a major one like that. Here, it's just as they rescind some permits, they go out of our database. You would hope that they'll eventually re-permit other facilities to replace that. Most years that who goes out, who goes in are going to balance on mature programs. Programs like confined animals where it's new enrollees, it just takes a while to get to that steady state. Water quality certs, another program that's kind of been up and down over the years. So as far as staffing wise, unless there's a negative BCP, the staffing will work on other activities.
Yeah, that's correct. And fortunately, right now, the economy is very good, so we're not seeing a lot of revenue decreases in any of our programs. Most of our programs, the revenue's been steady. And a lot of our programs are mature enough that we don't expect a whole lot of fluctuations. There's wastewater treatment plants. You know, we don't see a lot of those being built, and we don't see a lot of those going out of being decommissioned. Same with landfills, stuff like that. So the numbers are staying pretty much the same. The one exception that we've had, and it's really been a big exception in the 6 years that we've been doing this, is the cannabis program, where it wasn't that the revenues were decreasing as much as our forecasts were just not on the mark. And again, it was a statewide forecast that all the cannabis control agencies were using of 15,000 enrollees. Everybody thought it was going to be a gold rush, and it didn't quite turn out to be what everybody anticipated. So we staffed up, all the organizations staffed up based on that, and in that case, we are dealing with it. You know, we still have the same number of authorized positions, but we're dealing with it by holding some, positions open and not having people in those positions and charging to, which doesn't make me very popular with some of our program staff, but it is what it is. I mean, if things if revenues go down to that point, that's really the one tool that we have to address it immediately, is holding vacancies open. And then, like Glenn said, if the vacancies or if the revenues stay low, then one of the options is to do a negative BCP and say, we don't need the number of staff we were allocated. In the case of cannabis, we actually have more work than the available staff can deal with, but we just don't have the funding, so we need to keep a few vacancies open.
Any other questions? Okay, I think we're ready to turn it over to our second agenda topic, which is a presentation on the performance report. Oh, unfortunately, she stepped out. Oh, she's coming back. Good timing, Bev. Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll just take a moment here to get the program staff from the Office of Information Management and Analysis to come up here to do the presentation for the performance report.
So as a little bit of introduction to the performance report, like Glenn said, we did this a couple years ago. I think it might have been 2 or 3 years ago. In that interim period, OEMA has updated the report significantly, both in terms of the format and a little bit of the content. So we thought we'd go over it with you today, and it is one of the primary tools that we direct stakeholders to in terms of wanting to know information about a lot of the metrics. How many of this did we do? What exactly are the 10 staff in any particular program? What are they working on? And you should be able to go into the performance report and look at that. It'll give you a little better idea of that.
Hi, I'm Bev Anderson. I'm with the Office of Information Management and Analysis, and I'm the lead for the performance reports for the State Water Board. As was mentioned, I just want to go over how the performance report has changed over this last year or so and where we're heading with some of it. What is the performance report all about? First of all, the performance report is web-based. It's a report that's organized by major function within the water boards, and it's there to help us document our efforts as a water board to protect and allocate the state's waters. So there's a lot of information in the performance report, and we're working on making it easier to access some of that and more user-friendly, so that it's something that stakeholders and public can use on a regular basis. We do this to improve transparency and accountability of the water board, and to look at where we're seeing successes and the challenges in our mission areas. So there's a lot of usability associated here. This is the 11th year for the performance report, so we've been doing this for quite a while. And I was not here when it was presented a few years ago, so I'm not sure what you may have seen associated with it. We do get a number of website visits to various parts of the performance report. For the fiscal year 17-18 report, we had over 19,000 website visits. I haven't got the data on the 18-19 report yet, but it'll be coming. I will fully admit that probably 10,000 of those were me, so take that. The report does draw from more than 10 databases that we have at the State Water Board, as well as working closely with the various programs to sort through the data and make sure we're showing what we need to be showing. We have now approximately 20 interactive visualizations for the performance report, and that has replaced more than 160 separate web pages that had to be updated every year. So we've made huge moves to streamline the building of the performance report on a yearly basis. It looks at targets and measures for all 9 regions and the state board, 5 divisions, and puts everything out in a fairly easy to understand manner. We also have a section in the TMDL area of the performance report that shows some of our outcome-based measures, including over 207 water quality report cards showing where we're seeing improvements in the water sources that we have. We're also moving those into better formats so that we can tell better data stories and start looking at more comprehensive data to look at outcomes in the watersheds that we're doing the work in. Some of the enhancements that we have is we're moving towards more open data. The fewer cards that can be navigated through, we're presenting much more granular data. So if you want to go and look at where inspections occurred previously on the inspections page, all you would see was for Region 5, they did X number of inspections for NPDES facilities. Now you can actually go in and see what facilities were inspected and some other data associated with that. So we've gone to much more granular data. We're working on making our data more machine readable so it's easier to access and has the documentation behind it. And currently some of the data flow automation, we're working on improving that as well. So streamlining everything to give a much better experience with the performance reports. And does that show the whole? Oh yeah, it does. Okay, it's cut off on this screen. Just some really high level data here from the reports. The water boards has approximately 50,000 total regulated facilities in all the programs. About 800 individual permits were issued or updated last year, so more than the previous couple of years. Usually around 7,500 inspections are conducted each year. Penalties, around 2,000-ish on a yearly basis. The penalties assessed in Clean Water State Revolving Funds, those numbers may not be totally precise, as you heard about the fiscal issues. There's some issues associated with those, but we're sorting out those numbers as well. And generally, on a yearly basis, the water boards adopt somewhere around 7 to 10 TMDLs to start looking at new water bodies. So now I've talked about this. Let's see where we go. In order to find the performance reports, we used to have a really nice big button saying performance reports. Now you actually have to scroll down to the bottom of the State Water Board web page, and it's on every web page, every one of the pages. Down at the bottom, you'll see little performance reports down in that blue banner. And if you click on that, it'll take you to the main landing page for the performance reports. Can I go into the website? How would I do that from here? Like that. Would it be? Okay. I'm going to move so that I can. So once you're in the performance reports, you can start navigating around almost anywhere. So first thing I want to do is show the targets. Every year, the different programs set targets for how many inspections they're going to do, how many permits they're going to write, how many TMDLs are going to be adopted, things like that. So within the targets, if you click here, you'll go, uh-oh. Something went weird. I'm blaming IT for this. So, so this is just the landing page. It looks like Adobe Flash Player hasn't been updated on this computer. So if you go here and go to the regional boards, oh no. There we go. It just looks like it's slow loading. So these are the targets, what's being set by the different regions and programs. So if you want to take a look at targets being set, you can click on a region and it will show all of the targets that they set in here. In this case, this was Region 1. They had a target of inspecting 9 major NPDES facilities. They actually inspected 10, so they get this information and little scores. If there are regional considerations, like some regions have major cleanup sites that they have to redirect a lot of staff to, so they will write some kind of information there saying, you know, we weren't able to reach certain targets because we redirected staff to another area. So there's a lot of information here about the targets and the actual numbers achieved. And in here, you can go back and choose any year since we started doing the performance report. So all of the separate target pages have been collapsed into this, and you can go through and look at anything. And you can take a look at what the different regions have set for for the 1920 targets. So that is all available there. And if you go into, I'm going to focus on regulate here for a minute. If we go to the regulate page, this is a page where we have the best connection to data, so we can really look into what's behind the numbers with the data that's available. We are pulling directly from CWICS for people who are familiar with CWICS. And again, we've got a number of ways that we can filter and move around in here. What's being presented here is all of the inspections for NPDES major facilities for fiscal year 18-19 and all regions. If you want to focus on a single region, you can just select a single region. This table will stay with all regions, but everything else will be just the region you've chosen, so you can focus and see specifically Region 1 had 2 facilities not inspected and 10 facilities inspected. And if you're interested in seeing what the facilities are that were inspected, you can hit View Data, and it looks really tiny up there. But on your screen, you'll actually be able to read it. And that'll tell you exactly which facilities were inspected, and you can start looking at the data behind those numbers. And likewise for permit, oh, I should hit this one. Can I do that? For permits, we have similar data accessibility. So you have the overall data on the permits. Here we've got permits not expired or not renewed during the fiscal year, the permits issued or renewed, and permits past expiration date, which we always hope are the smallest numbers on that screen. So breaks down those permits. And again, if you would like to see the permits that actually, or the facilities that actually were permitted, we might have, yeah. We can pull up all of the permits that got issued and where they are, information like that. So very granular data available now. And one last thing I'd like to show, and then if anyone has questions, I can answer some questions. On the targets page, there is a link for water quality fees. And this is kind of a different setup here. This is, again, because of that fiscal issue, we don't have 18-19 numbers yet, but for 17-18, this gives an idea of where fees are collected and what programs they're going to. So you can see a breakdown here. So in this case, the first, what's called a tree diagram, is fund expenditures by program, and the second one is the fund uses by category. So you can see direct funding is the biggest function, or the biggest use of the funds from the fees program. And then the numbers are broken down here, so you can see the actual numbers associated. So there's a lot of stuff here that you can start looking at and see what's going on, how the different programs use the money that's out there, and see where the permits are being written and where inspections are being done. And that's about all I have. So I'll move back there in case anyone has any questions.
So out of curiosity, when you went down there and you said it was getting more granular, when you're on pages, like you said, maybe in the inspection report or permits or whatever, are you able to click on those and actually see the permits, or do you have to then go somewhere else?
Right now, we're working with what we want to put out to make sure that we don't put out any data that is something that shouldn't be out in these things. So at this point, what is on there is what you are going to be able to see. We do have the ability to put it out like everything. We're just working with IT to make sure that we don't put out data that is too personal or there's any issues with that. But yeah, we're working towards getting out everything anyone might want to see without causing any problems with data.
So for right now, yeah, you're going to have to go to a separate page, I think, to look up the actual permits, which I think by law are supposed to be posted on our website. So, and we have an issue with that. We have an issue with a lot of things. The Americans with Disabilities Act is requiring us to make everything ADA compliant that we post on our websites. If you look through our current websites, there's stuff going back to the 50s and things that obviously is scan things that are nowhere near ADA compliant. So we have a big effort right now where we're going through all of our websites to make those into ADA compliant documents. And if you look at the budget change proposals on the Department of Finance's websites, they're lacking a lot of the information that they had in previous years. Most of the information is there, but some of the key things are not. And again, that's an ADA compliance issue.
Is there any further questions? Excuse me. We want to thank everyone. Again, as John has mentioned, as Glenn has mentioned, throughout, you take this information home and you have some further questions for us, some ideas about our structures. Please don't hesitate to contact one of us, again, through a phone call or via email, and we'll be more than happy to, individually meet with you. Our next meeting is scheduled, I believe, for June, correct?
Yeah.
And we'll definitely, redefine some of these numbers and break them out, have further discussions on this. Again, as John mentioned, the budget hearings, legislative hearings will be coming up in a few weeks. So, we encourage, to participate in those. And, we'll continue to monitor those at our level. And like I said, any further questions, please, again, don't hesitate. Later on this afternoon, we'll have a meeting for the water rights, and kind of same format. We'll go over those numbers, talk about the cost drivers. And then on Friday, we have a meeting scheduled for our drinking water program and talk about that funding. I think we had one question here before.
Yeah, just one question. I guess I'll shout it out.
Well, it's coming up. Well, what's coming up, I do say, like David said, we'll have the May revise will come out obviously in May. So our next meeting will be in June. We'll have a better idea then of some of our numbers. We're hoping our accounting will be, for FisCal, we'll have year-end reports for the 18-19 fiscal year. So we'll be able to roll those in for the first time that we haven't seen now for a year and a half.
Like last year, you had a separate discussion on ag lands, and I was wondering, do you anticipate the same thing going on this year? And if so, when would that?
Right now, no. We had, probably 3 or 4 years of discussions with the ag community with their fee structure. We made a change last year. No one's approached me directly to say, hey, we need to revisit that. So right now, there's no, I'll call it breakouts for that program. It'll just be, we're probably going to use the same structure unless something happens in the May revise that we're not aware of.
Thanks.
Yeah, and so we have a couple action items to mainly update the table and get you more information on pro rata and things. But if there's other things that you would find helpful to you as we go through this, let us know, and we can build those into the handouts as well for our next meeting.
All right, thank you.
All right, well, thank you.